Hi, I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World, and today I'm going to show you the beginnings of how to use a technique called quilt as you go. I love to quilt by machine because it's really fast and I can get a lot of projects done. The hardest part about quilting by machine, doing machine quilting, is basically every time your sewing changes direction. So a lot of times when I'm doing machine quilting, I will choose to do a technique that's really just parallel lines, because then I'm not changing direction at all. I'm going the whole width or the whole length of the quilt through the machine in one direction. But sometimes you really want to be able to change direction, and that's when quilt as you go becomes a great technique, because what you do is you quilt smaller pieces of your quilt. In this case, I'm going to show you a project where I'm quilting individual blocks. You quilt those pieces in the machine before you sew them together into one big block. So this video is going to be an introduction to the technique, and then I'm going to do separate videos showing some of the specific designs that work really well as quilting designs and that are really easy to use on the sewing machine. So I'm going to take you and show you some blocks and how you're going to join them together into a quilt, and just the basics on this technique. So these are examples of some of my blocks. The key thing for quilt as you go, as you can see, this block has already been quilted. So you do, in this case, applique. You can also do this with pieced. You make your block, and then you cut a piece of batting that's the same size as your block, and you do all your quilting on that piece without any backing on there before you sew it all together. So in this case, I layered the block with the batting, and it's really important to use 100% cotton batting. I'll show you why in a minute. But you layer the block with the batting, and then I did just a line of sewing around the edge. I did the whiskers and his face details. I sewed all of that by machine, and then I did just a simple chevron pattern repeated to fill up the background. So this is going to have nice dense quilting, and when it's washed it's going to be really nice and crinkly. And I would not have wanted to do all of these direction changes on a big quilt. This is going to be a pretty big, not quite a twin size quilt, but it's going to be a bigger quilt than I would have wanted to wrestle through the machine for all those direction changes. So here's one with a chevron pattern. Here's one with kind of a block pattern in the background. And this is one with wavy lines in the background, just kind of overlapping wavy lines. And these are the things that I'm going to show in a series of videos. I'll do one video on each kind of general technique, general look to the background. But what I want to show you now is how to join the blocks together. So after you get them quilted, you just sew them together, just like you would regular blocks. So I've got two blocks, I put them right sides together, and I sewed them together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, this is just like any other quilt assembly. It's just that the batting is already in there and it's already quilted. Now we're going to take it over to the iron. Normally, when I press my seams between blocks, I press them to one side or the other, and a lot of times I'll press them to one side for this row and then to the opposite side for the next row down, so that they nest together nicely, and I have a video showing that. But with this technique, because I'm also dealing with the thickness of the batting, I really want to spread that out. So I'm going to open this seam up, and I'm going to press it open instead of pressing it to one side. And this is why it's absolutely essential that you use a 100% cotton batting, because I'm going to press this with steam on a nice hot setting on cotton, so I get a good burst of steam in there, because I want to press that extra bulk as flat as I can get it. So I'm just really going to mash that down, and you get a nice flat seam there. So I'm going to do that with all of my blocks, and then turn it over so you can see. It really is a nice flat seam. You would think you would get some kind of a difficult ridge in there, but it is not bad at all. What I'm going to do next, the last stage in this, you're going to put it together just like any other quilt. I'm going to get all of my blocks sewn together until I have the full-size quilt, and then I'm going to layer that with the backing. I don't need to layer it with the batting because that's already in there, but I'm going to layer it with the backing. I'm going to pin baste it just like any other quilt, and I'll have there's a pop-up that'll have a link to the basting video. But I'll baste it just like anything else, and then I'm just going to machine quilt either in the ditch, or what I'll probably do, what I like to do, is just a little bit down each side on both sides of that seam so that each block will have kind of a line of quilting about 1/4 of an inch in from that block. That will be all straight lines, parallel lines, no direction changes, so it's exactly the kind of machine quilting I like to do. But because I did the quilt as you go, I got nice wavy lines and all kinds of direction changes in these background patterns that, again, I never ever would have wanted to do with straight up machine quilting. So that's it. It's actually really easy and very, very similar to regular quilting. The only difference is that you're laying smaller batting pieces with your quilt blocks and quilting them before you put them all together. But before that point and after that point, it's just the same as traditional quilting. But it is much, much easier to spin those small quilt blocks around in your sewing machine and get all those fun direction changes that give you really, really interesting and fun patterns in your background quilting. I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World. I'll see you next time.